Events are being shut down all over the country. Contractors, employees, etc. who went to conferences previously are no longer going there. You guys chose to come here of your own time, volition, and leave, and that means a lot to me. You devoted time and resources, and I really believe that true believers are the thing that really move movements forward, and we're going to see that this weekend. So a couple things to start out with. Obviously, we're going to be tweeting this, so live tweeting on the tweet deck, you'll see this on the right and left-hand screens. We've got the @DEF conference, that's our tweet handle, and please use the hashtag DEF2013. We're pulling questions from the crowd and from those who are joining us online in the webcast, so welcome to those who are out there in the internet world. Please use DEF2013 to transmit your thoughts. So let's first thing I want to ask is, how many of you are sitting next to someone you already know? Okay, for those of you who are, please stand up. Please stand up and find someone to sit next to that you don't already know. And the reason we're doing that is DEF isn't about more than just ideas. It's about networks. So we'll give you a couple minutes to kind of find a new place to sit and meet some new people, hopefully. Settled. Thank you. Now that we're all settled, the main point of this conference in my mind is to develop these networks. Develop these networks of junior officers, senior officers, mid-level officers from across the services, across the DoD, to figure out ways to work together. There'll be ample opportunity as the weekend progresses to have these conversations, both at happy hours and in our ideation sessions. But if you meet someone compelling and you guys want to go outside to talk, please feel free to do so. We're trying to disrupt the normal kind of defense conference type of mindset and allow people to walk around, mingle, and figure out how to make things happen. Next, for internet access. A lot of you guys have already seen this, but University of Chicago has a great internet infrastructure here. So please utilize these. The network name is University of Chicago, or UChicago. Open your browser, put in the meeting ID, and then leave the password blank. You should have full access. Remember to tweet, Facebook, and email as required. I'll leave this up for a second. Okay, so my role is going to basically be the MC for this weekend. I'll be introducing the speakers, introducing the panels, facilitating the breakout sessions, and kind of leading us through the weekend. But there are a couple of rules I want to talk about. The first is have fun and meet new people. So we're all coming from all across the country, finding out who the defense innovators are, who's got hands in this pot, who's got ideas on acquisition, on personnel reform. So take ideas from these people, meet them, and expand your networks. DEF was really formed after the whole disruptive thinkers movement started, and I was on Twitter and kind of seeing these really interesting conversations going on between people. The thing I noticed though is that not a lot of them had ever met in person. And I'm a big fan of interpersonal interaction, people meeting face to face, talking over ideas, figuring out how to make the world work better. And so we wanted a place to bring these innovators and other people who are thinking about big things together into one place. So take this opportunity throughout the weekend to make that happen. Next, ask tough questions. So in the middle of a panel, if something doesn't sound right to you, or you have a question about something, or something is compelling, raise your hand, we'll take questions on the spot. We've left time at the end of each presentation to interact with the audience, and interact with the speakers. So please do so. Next is there's a reason why we're all in civilian clothes this weekend. What I've found is that taking off the uniform, taking off the rank, and taking off the medals we all kind of tend to look at when we first meet somebody kind of opens up that communication and dialogue. We have senior officers in the audience today, and I thank you for coming. We're going to be very respectful of the rank that you have earned, but please keep in mind, we're going to try to keep it on a first-name basis as best we can, especially in the ideation groups, to facilitate those ideas and those exchange of information. Whether you're an E4 or an 09, you all have something to contribute to this conversation. We want to make sure those ideas are heard. And finally, don't feel bad about leaving the room to talk to someone new. Again, networks, networks, networks. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about here in my opening remarks in a couple minutes. So as I mentioned, my talk today is going to be about networks and execution. And Micah Murphy, my good friend here, who's kind of run our external relations, has a quote that I think is really apropos, and that execution is the new innovation. And we all have good ideas, we all have things that we want to implement in the military, but unless you do something about those ideas, nothing really gets done. So this is my Uncle David. He was a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, basically fought World War II, fought in Korea, fought in Vietnam, And in 1968, he was shot down over Vietnam and put in the Hanoi Hilton for 5 years. This is a man who has had an incredible impact on my life. In 2009, I believe, right before I went on deployment to OEF, he invited me to come to an event that he was having at the Minnesota National Guard base with a reunion of all of his peers from the 1950s and 1960s. And there were guys ranging in age from 50 to 90 years old, the peers he had flown with, the peers he had led, the peers who had maintained his jets. And in that context, I really started to understand the importance of people and networks. So we in DoD have a really large focus on multi-billion-dollar weapon systems and pushing out the newest and best technology into the battlefield. But when it comes down to it, it's really about the people you're leading, the people who are leading you, and how you interact with them and how you make connections happen. And in that room, he broke down. This was the first time in public that he had actually talked about his Vietnam experience. And as a lot of you know, the Hanoi Hilton was an incredibly bad place to be in, because you've probably all heard the stories from Vice Admiral Stockdale, Bud Day, and those others. And a lot of them came back and didn't really want to share too much about it. But he was in a place where he had peers and other people who understood what he had gone through. Whether or not, it may not have been directly in the Hanoi Hilton itself, but they had served with him on the front lines, understood what it meant to be a military officer and military enlisted personnel. And I think what we're forming today is a similar type of relational network. In that 50, 60 years time down the road, when we're all old and crotchety walking around, coming together at the VFWs or wherever it is, we're going to have common experiences. And those experiences aren't necessarily going to be about, oh, I flew the F-18, or I drove the Abrams, or I was in a Stryker brigade. There was this first lieutenant who led me in the Battle of Fallujah, or there was this captain who was the CAG of our air wing, who was larger than life and inspired me to be a better leader and a better person. It all comes down to those interpersonal relationships. So this is a picture of the Hanoi Hilton. And one of the things that Vice Admiral James Stockdale did when he was there, at the time he was a captain, is as soon as a new person came in, shot down, probably broken arms, broken legs, he tried to integrate them into the organization. As soon as they were put into a cell, after probably an interrogation or beating, he made sure the person who was next to them got them tied into the TAP network and other communication means, because he realized the importance of developing that bond. Even though there was a wall between them, even though there were guards who were trying to suppress their ability to communicate, he ensured that there was a strong, cohesive, collective environment going on interpersonally within that environment. And one of the things he said was that him being so far away from DC and him kind of be able to create his own rules and not necessarily being within the bureaucracy allowed him to adapt to the situation as it required. And again, lay down rules for that environment that allowed them to return with honor. And return with honor was really their main focus while they were there. There was a code of conduct. All of us have read the code of conduct, and it's a great infrastructure, a great foundation for what we as military officers and enlisted personnel have to do when we're captured in those environments. However, sometimes that is not, the strict rule of the road is not necessarily the way it has to be done. And good leaders have to learn to adapt to that situation. Admiral Stockdale was able to do that and transmit those lessons learned to his personnel. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, in that we have rules and regulations that are very important. Many of those were written in blood and for good reason. But as leaders, we have to understand when we can kind of deviate from those. Not necessarily break them, but deviate from those to make needed change and instill a culture of adaptability and innovation within our subordinates. As we've seen over the past 10 years of conflict with many of the peers who are sitting in this room and have served, is that when we got on the ground, the war that we had to fight was not necessarily the war we were trained for. And it wasn't because we got bad training, it's because we couldn't anticipate what was coming out. So 25, 26-year-olds on the ground, Iraq and Afghanistan, being introduced to villages, even pilots overheading close air support stacks, were faced with situations that training couldn't necessarily give to them. So they had to, on the fly, be entrepreneurial. They had to take the lessons they learned, the rubric that they had been given, but adapt to the requirements of the age and the requirements of the specific situation they were in. And I think what we've seen is that those guys and girls have returned from combat to garrison. And there's some frustration there because while overseas, they were able to make an incredible impact on the ground. But back in garrison, it's a little more difficult to fit within that natural box when you've been trained to lead, trained to innovate, and trained to be creative. And so there's some difficulty right now in adapting to that. But I think we can take those lessons learned and start to leverage some of those innovative capabilities that we learned on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq and transmit those to the future. We don't know what the future holds in terms of what our future wars are going to be. It might be China, it might be something that we don't even anticipate, it might be Africa, it might be some ally we have right now that suddenly doesn't become an ally. But we have to take those lessons we learned overseas over the past 10 years, the adaptability that was fostered, and translate that to whatever situation we find in. So moving from that, it's all about the networks. And what I see DEF being is an opportunity for us to expand our networks, to create organizations that are like TEDx, but make them maybe a DEFx. So DEF right now is a national conference once a year. We'll see how this one goes, maybe transmit it to future years. But what if there was a cell at Fort Leavenworth? Or what if there was a cell in Washington, D.C. or San Diego, where you could have little talks between 10 and 15 people talking about the innovations you created, the ideas that you're seeing, how to execute, how you took something from an idea to an actual product that was useful in your own little sphere of influence. And then post those. Share those with your peers from across the military to give them inspiration and say, you know what, this lieutenant over here in the Navy, he did this thing. I'm a captain in the Air Force. Maybe I can do that too. Maybe I can take lessons learned from that. And this innovation doesn't just become a buzzword. Innovation actually becomes, this is the end result. This is what can happen when creative people take action. And we have some of those members here in our audience today. You'll see this afternoon when we go into our ideation sessions, guys like Daryl Dipty, who created, of his own time and own volition, an app that will hopefully mitigate some of the military suicides that are going on. We've got guys like Tony Hitala, my co-founder here, who created Military Traveler, which is basically a website, an app for people in the military traveling across the country to look at a directory of all the applicable things that they need in the military. These were not things that our requirements process demanded, but some junior officer, some senior officer, someone with some innovative idea said, we need this. I'm going to take my own time. I will make this happen and move forward with it. And I think these networks are key to that. Because without the relational networks that we have, we can never have created these problems. We can never have created these solutions. And that's really the future in my mind. 20, 30 years down the road, we may be in a conflict where we have an Air Force general who was at DEF with a Navy admiral, who was at DEF with a DoD civilian who's now undersecretary. They get into a conflict. They now have a relation that's been built for 20 years, and they can converse, figure out ways to work more closely together in a joint environment, and move forward with a better solution. Again, there's a picture of Afghanistan. And so with these networks, this is how Disruptive Thinkers was formed. My buddy and I were sitting in a bar in San Diego. A lot of you have heard this story before. He was a 10-year government civilian working both the Defense Department and at the White House, giving very high-level briefings to 3 and 4 stars and other Defense Department civilians. He left because he wanted to join the military. He wanted to do something more for his country and join the Navy SEALs. But as soon as he put the uniform on and put those ensign bars on, he found that his credibility was all of a sudden shot. Even though the 10 years of experience he had had, the graduate degree he had received from a prestigious British university, all the experience he had had otherwise was not really considered and not really taken advantage of. So when he and I were talking, we were thinking, how can young junior military officers make a difference in a bureaucracy? And so we wanted to look to our peers. Who in our peer group had made an impact in the world? And the first thing that came to mind was entrepreneurs. 25, 26, 30-year-olds who had built multi-billion-dollar companies. Mark Zuckerberg, Michael Dell, even some of the smaller ones in San Diego with the biotech companies. They were taking an idea, pushing them forward, and changing their world. So what if we brought some of these folks together? What if we started learning about things like design theory, or things like biomimicry, or things like how to build how architects think about the world? What if we brought those into the context of a military environment to start us thinking differently about the world? Not to take business and replace the military structure with business, but really to think differently about how we view how the world is constructed. And from that, 3 cells were formed. There's one still strong in San Diego. Over 80 people come to each of their event per month, working on podcasts. It's an incubator for other new ventures in San Diego. There's one in D.C. Had a chance to meet with folks like Andrew Marshall at Office of Net Assessment, and talking with a human performance expert, talking about how some of the research he's doing can apply directly to OCS and other human performance capabilities that we can kind of utilize in the military that we're not necessarily looking at. So ways to integrate some new ideas throughout. And then finally the Austin chapter, which is run by Jeff Gilmore, who's also our social media guru here. They recently talked to a food truck entrepreneur, someone who had $5 left in her pocket and decided to create a food truck of her own volition, and now it's wildly successful. Well, what are the things that she did to make that happen? I think there's some direct learning results from that can be translated from her story to our story in making impact in the military in general. And that really was how Defense Entrepreneurs formed from that Disruptive Thinkers movement, transitioning more towards a military-focused environment where we can take junior officers, link them up with senior leaders, have them hear some of the ideas we're going about, talk about the things that are important to us, and figure out ways to integrate them. And then finally, in my mind, one of the key elements in the military right now is there is an innovation movement. It's beyond my wildest expectations. There are senior leaders who care, and they are championing these things. One of the organizations I worked for previously, the CNO Rapid Innovation Cell, was an organization formed by the CNO to give 15 junior officers the opportunity to push disruptive solutions and new things into the military infrastructure. We're rolling out things like 3D printing on ships. And while the NAVSEA and normal acquisition process is interested in this, they're a little bit, cautious about putting it out there. And they have good reason to be so. But we wanted to put these in the hands of sailors and let the sailors make a decision as to how they would best use it. So in 2 weeks from now, we're going to put the first 3D printer on a ship and see how the sailors execute it. Additionally, wargaming. A lot of us have wargamed and figured out, tabletop games, etc. What if we brought this to the 21st century, crowdsourced it, and got new tactics from, the 01, the 25-year-old, the 30-year-old, the 50-year-old, and figured out how to collect all of this and see, okay, maybe 9 out of 10 times this crazy thing this guy did with the ship failed, but this one thing, this is really interesting, this one thing might be applicable. How can we translate that to a broader culture? And then finally, getting to action. When you have an idea, you have to take that idea and make something of it. So this is one of my favorite quotes, something that's a theme quote of the Crick. T.E. Lawrence, many of you know Lawrence of Arabia, the guy who went to the Bedouins in South Saudi Arabia during the World War I, and really kind of led an insurgency, figured out a way to get a small group of individuals motivated, and he took a dream and made it into reality. His Dreamers of the Day quote, those that make action, they scare people, they are dangerous, they disrupt the status quo, but sometimes that's needed. They keep the status quo on their toes and push them in the directions that they think need to make happen. So that's all I have for you right now. My Twitter handle is @BenColeman, and please email me at benjamin.coleman@gmail.com for any other questions or concerns following this. But are there any questions you guys have about the movement, DEF, Disruptive Thinkers, my talk, anything I talked about here? All right, I guess there's nothing. All right, moving on, we're going to go straight to Roxanne Gross and Nate Finney. Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
I did just think of a question.
Yes.
I'm from Austin. You said Disruptive Thinkers Forum has a cell in Austin.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know that. Could I find out?
Absolutely. Talk to Jeff. Jeff is your man to make that happen.
That's networking.
Absolutely. So, there's the connection. All right. So next on our agenda is going to be Roxanne and Nate. Both are Army officers. And in the interest of full discussion, we want to have a little debate. So is disruptive thinking valuable to the military? So Roxanne's going to take the pro position. Nate's going to take the con position, I guess. And we're going to discuss this. We have about 5 minutes of remarks. And then we'll open it up to the crowd to talk about this. What do you guys think? I know there's some critics here, which is great. We want to have those discussions and bring out those points and see where we're going from here. Their bios are in the packet that we sent out to y'all, so I'm not going to waste time doing that. But Roxanne and Nate, go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing this morning? It's pretty inspirational, right? Kind of hard to follow. So, I'm Nate Finney, as he said. I'm an Army officer. I was brought into this after Ben and I had conversations. As he mentioned, I was one of the ones we had conversations over email and Twitter, following his Small Wars Journal article. And really, we just wanted to discuss why are junior leaders so frustrated. And it really came down to the fact that we felt like we had the opportunity to be so innovative in the field, and yet we felt like I don't think there was any justification for it yet, but we felt like we might be constrained once we came back to Garrison. Ben talked pretty well about that. So what Roxanne and I are going to do here today is essentially talk about disruptive thinking, because DEF has flowed out of disruptive thinking. So my position, and the position of critique, is essentially that disruptive thinking is negative. It has a negative connotation. A lot of folks, particularly the senior leaders I've talked to from 06 and above, when they hear the term disruptive thinking, they think chaos. They think junior leaders really just griping and complaining. And you see a lot of that on blogs today. You can go to many different blogs, I'm not going to name any in particular, where you see junior officers just kind of venting. They don't really have anything constructive to say other than, it's not working for me. Right? So that is one of the main negative views of disruptive thinking. The other one is what Ben touched on at the very end, which is no action. Right? Guys can have good ideas, they can want to shake up the system, but as they try and institute those ideas, it really is just a good idea. Or they have no actual plan for action or buy-in or networks to actually execute So our question today, is that really applicable to the military? Is this disruption applicable to the military? So what I'm going to do real quick is just ask you, okay? Is disruptive thinking applicable to the military? Sir? Not here. Absolutely.
Hey, one quick question, one quick thing, as you guys do talk, if you can be a little bit louder than you would normally be, just so we can make sure we pick up on the mic for the guys on the web. Thanks.
So we got one that says absolutely, disruptive thinking is applicable to the military. Anybody else? Good.
It's not. It's an
Okay.
unnecessary adjective that is applied to thinking. Thinking, period. So if you add disruptive, that means you're giving credence to the people who aren't thinking, that you're being disruptive against. So if you just say, I'm the one who's thinking,
Right.
then that puts them in their proper place, which is they're not.
Right.
I'd say the word disrupt, well, talking about thinking, we're thinking, you say that you're meaning individuals thinking, but organizations also think and act, and organizations have to be programmed to behave in certain ways, which is where the word disruptive comes in the business literature, is that a company that's designed to bring a certain product to the market is not equipped to create products that there's no market for or that investors don't value. So the whole idea of disruptive is something outside what an organization is designed to do. So in that sense, I think disruptive thinking is valid, that our organization is built to do certain things very well, but it's not built to handle things outside that realm of expertise.
That's a great point. That's real quick, so I'll get right back to you. So this concept, disruptive thinking,